Hello, I'm Victor Vogel. Welcome to What the Flip podcast. Tonight, we're going to be covering the first in a series of 12 questions, or not questions, really just 12 facts you need to know about healthcare and what's going on with that. And it's a study done by the Brookings Group, which is a long-time research company out of headquartered out of Washington, D.C. They do a lot of government research on a lot of different areas. This one happened to be on healthcare, and it's it's one that well, they've been in existence for I think since 1916, and have a tremendous amount of people who are highly professional in the areas of research and uh, government activity and government funding and those kinds of things. So tonight we're going to do the first fact. But before we get started, I kind of wanted to delve into, if I can go back and get back into this segment here on associated with the Brookings Group. And towards the end, I'll go ahead and give you the link to that so that you'll have it and you can go back to it and research it in there as we go through it. Uh, the thing I wanted to kind of put on record, I did a previous video where I was doing some research on how to use this particular software package. And So one of the things, let me put my headsets in too while I'm at it. One of the things that I've found organization was the idea of the difficulty we were having with healthcare. Now, I had a suspect of it. Had hip surgery. 2 years this coming January, and that year that I had this, I spent a tremendous amount of time, just a tremendous amount of time, trying to understand the expenses associated with that surgery. To give you a real quick idea, the top line retail, this is kind of like a car dealership thing here. Retail price for that surgery was $75,000. Of course, I have Medicare, and then I have a supplemental plan like most seniors do out there. And out of that $75,000, I ended up paying about $900. And you would say that's really great, and it is really great. I'm glad that I didn't have to pay more of that. But most people think that's the private insurance provider that was the benefit of all that. The reality is it was Medicare. Medicare initially negotiated that $75,000 down to around $30,000. And then the Medicare plan itself paid for the vast majority of those expenses. So really what it amounted to is the private health insurance firm, as I'm understanding that from what they told me, is simply a pass-through management group that manages your Medicare and negotiated prices and everything and consolidates it. And it's kind of a between party between vendors like hospitals, doctors, labs, all that kind of stuff, to the Medicare group. And they kind of oversee that, and then they take a cut of the money for doing that. So that's how they get paid for that. So the vast majority of that. Now, if you don't have Medicare and you're doing this through that company, I'm pretty sure I would have exceeded my $5,000 deductible limit on that private plan. So that's some of the things you need to really start understanding is the difference between what your private carrier is providing you and what a plan like Medicare can provide you, because there is a possibility you'll have an option to choose something along the Medicare plan like I have. Um, and if that comes about and it's handled correctly, then uh, you're going to see a lot of people transitioning off of private insurance onto Medicare uh, because of the cost associated. Because what I pay for insurance under Medicare is probably, you know, 10, 15, 20, maybe even 100 times less than what, say, my family pays for it out there working, or their company and them combined pay for it. And we're going to cover some of that information as we go through here, and you'll see why it's important for you to truly understand this stuff, because you're going to be making some decisions in the future. Whether it's Democrat or Republican is really not going to be an issue in the future. The cost of this and the management of it is going to be so exceedingly um, extensive that people either not going to be able to afford it at all, or somebody's going to have to crack down and go to something like a Medicare for all plan. There is not going to be an option in the future. Okay, now that's a prediction of mine. You know, maybe between now and then, there's going to be a lot of negotiation where you give and take along the way. It's not going to all happen at once, either or. You know, it'll happen piecemeal, but you'll begin to see it. And as we go through these facts that I'm going to present from the Brookings Institute, you're going to see why, if you're paying attention and you follow it all the way through, you're going to see why um, you're, you know, what I'm saying is pretty much true. The cost just can't continue to escalate the way it is. And so what I know is the only thing that has even remotely come close to trying that was the ACA, and it is not what we need. We need something far more like Medicare for all. Uh, and that's not social medicine. That's not socialism. Well, it is socialism, but I mean, it's not like people out there saying it's communism. Socialism is not communism. But there is some rationale for why we need to go that way. And some of what has caused us to be where we are has to do with capitalism, although people have the wrong opinion about that. True, capitalism is not an evil. It is a necessity for any survival of a country. It's just when it becomes unethical capitalism that you begin to see things affecting something like healthcare as bad as it has. So that's just kind of to pique your interest. Stay with me and pay attention to these 12 uh, facts. And also maybe for you to start delving into your own. There's a lot of, outside of the Brookings, there's a lot of other, there's a book I've read from two guys that used to be bill collectors for medical companies that gave that up and went in and wrote a book on how to get out of paying medical expenses. Or actually what they created is an organization where they got volunteers to contribute to them, and they would pay off people's medical expenses. And they went into this whole arena in their book about how pharmaceutical companies and major hospital conglomerates and real estate people and everybody else, the impact that's having on your healthcare cost. And what I find out, because I was always blaming the doctors, but what I found out is that it's really not the doctors or your provider per se. It's not your provider, the doctor, the nurses, the tech people, all of that. It really gets into the conglomerate organizations that have forced them into doing something a certain way. But we'll cover that down the road. But so just a couple of key points I want to put out here, just so people will understand as we go deeper into these facts why we are journeying down this path. Um, and first of all, let me just read a little bit from this article uh, in the front part of it, sort of explaining why they have these 12 facts. The healthcare sector now employs about 11% of American workers. Think about that. The healthcare industry as a whole, that can be insurance companies, hospitals, doctors, nurses, all those things that are associated with healthcare. 11% of all people employed out there. That's a lot of people. That's millions of people that are focused on this idea of healthcare. Okay, that's a big percentage. Millions of employees. So it is no small organization. The healthcare industry as a total, uh, and it says here. It accounts for the healthcare industry accounts for about 24% of government spending. That's from the Center for Medicare and Medicare Services from the government. Uh, 24% of our budget, our whole budget in America, that's 1/4 of the budget, is taken up by healthcare. That's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. Uh, it says that health insurance, the largest component, 26% of non-wage compensation, and healthcare is one of the largest categories of consumer spending. So, in insurance companies, out of that 24%, account for the largest segment of cost, which I have a whole different program somewhere down the road I want to do on insurance companies. Uh, but the consumer, that's you, currently are expending about 8.1% of your consumer expenditures. That's the largest consumer category is healthcare. 8.1% of your net earnings are going into some sort of healthcare program out there. So those are just some numbers out front that I wanted to cover so that we have some sense of idea. Now, what's causing that? That's the question we need to take a look at. Why in the world are we spending that much money on healthcare? Where do we stand in relation to the rest of the world on that kind of spending? Not just the spending of it, but as the productivity, how much productivity are we getting for that kind of high investment? And then on top of that is the result, is the result product we're getting comparable? Well, actually, it should be exceptionally better than the rest of the world. The fact is, when you start using numbers instead of people's gut feeling or emotional perspective on it, but just looking at, do we have a higher death rate? Do we have longer longevity? Just a variety of things. Do we have more people getting good health care versus no people getting versus? When you start really looking at all of those numbers, we don't stack up that well as a country. We don't stack up that well for spending 25% of our budget. So if you were doing that, if you were buying something, you if you bought a car and it cost you 25% of your total income to buy this car, and it broke down every week, um, or you didn't have it available to you like 60 or 70% of the time, you wouldn't like that investment. And that's the way you need to be thinking about healthcare. Now, why don't we think about it like that? And what you're going to find as we go through this is that the larger portion of healthcare cost is associated with an older population. Although it's not the primary reason for the significant increase in growth, but those are the people who are using the services, the products, so to speak. And as you grow older, it becomes more expensive because what you have to deal with is more severe. So there's a whole rationale about how should we deal with that? Do younger people pay for older people kind of thing? And the answer, there's a lot of debate about it. And we get to that particular segment, the facts around that segment, we'll cover a little more on that. And it makes a little more sense. For sure, what we have to do is what we're doing, we will not be able to sustain. We just can't sustain it. That's been proven. Republicans and Democrats know that. Now, what we do is the question. How we go about doing it is a question. Some of that's philosophical. Some of it's just flat. Are you more generated towards money or more generated towards people? And the fact is, there's got to be not what I call a compromise. I'm not a big compromise. As a consultant, I used to build teams and organizations, and you cannot. That's one of the problems I have with Congress. You cannot operate well with compromise because it is a lose-lose scenario. Everybody walks away with something less than they went into it with. We used to show groups how to create what's called synergy, which is really what happens is you come out with when you go in and you drop all the preconditions and you really just look at the problem and you focus on it and quit worrying about who's going to benefit from what, then you normally come up with a product better than any one of the groups would have come up with. And that product then benefits everyone much better. So that's part of what's going on here in terms of a future solution path if we can get people past this Republican, Democrat. I mean, somewhere along the line, that has to go away, folks. It's just not going to work. Our country is just going to fall to pieces with that philosophy. And if one way gets its way all the time, and what you're going to do is kind of like a program I used to watch where people created these inventions and just basically, were killing themselves doing it, like, creating the fastest car in the world. And they were, speeding down, hitting on the desert towards, something that would block them down there, like a mountain or something like that. And they forgot to put the brakes in there because somebody didn't get so focused on speed that they forgot about brakes. Anyway, there's stuff like that that goes on in the world. So that's why you don't want just one party having significant control over anything, because if you get into that mode, you miss things that can cause you a lot of harm in the long run. So uh, anyway, so what we need to do is, what we need to do as a population is not put so much of the burden on those people who we send to Congress. We need to get involved in what's going on. Right now, people go and pay thousands of dollars a year for insurance that they don't use. They don't use the first 10 years of their life. You have other people who pay less, like me on Medicare, and we use it a lot. Okay, $75,000 for one surgery. So, that there's something inherently idiotic about that whole concept. And there is another solution, but it's got to be not one of compromise, and it's got to be one of not trying to focus on how I'm going to benefit from this, but what needs to really happen to sustain the maximum amount of best health care for everyone in the country in an equitable way that provides a product that is far superior than anybody else's. So we got a lot of work to do in that area. Now, what I'm saying about us not allowing just Congress to do this, we need to get engaged. We need to look at all this. We need to understand it clearly, um, not on everything they ever do, but certainly on key topics like healthcare and climate and employment and housing and things like that 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 are causing a lot of suffering and pain, but also a lot of cost to this country, and puts us in a very precarious or dangerous situation like this pandemic. So we have to learn about this. So that's why these 12 facts about healthcare will get you started. It will not get you everything you need to know. You need to go out and dig in a little more. Find out how things are working or have been working and how they're trending towards working so that you can actually talk to your representatives when they come home intelligently and not just take the word of your insurance broker, take the word of your doctor, or take the word of your boss or your employer or anybody else. Um, because the reality is everybody is just not wanting to deal with it, and so consequently we have a mess. Okay, so it's time for us to kind of step up to the plate and start getting involved in the major things that impact this out there anyway. So that's sort of what I want to do from that standpoint. Um, I want to kind of try to start out by uh, covering the first questions on there. And the very first question out here is fact one: the per capita healthcare spending. Per capita is what the average person in an area. Like if you live in a county, uh, they take the average amount that all of the amount that is earned by everybody in that county, and they divide it by the number of people in the county. That it's kind of like an average income, so to speak, and then that's compared against the productivity of all, or not the productivity, but the value of all the goods and services produced in that county, and you can compare those two to see, how your finances are stacking up, how, the earning wage, the average wage, the unemployment, all this then plays into that, far beyond me and certainly a lot of us. But you need to understand a little bit that per capita simply means when they're looking at this numbers, they're looking at them against the average earning wage of the country in this case. Okay, so what fact one says is the per capita health care spending nearly quadruple, 4 times the spending between 1980 and 2018. I saw this coming. I spent a lot of time in business and consulting and private, as a privately employed person and as a consultant. And I spent a lot of it as a senior executive in the areas of organizational change, development, and human resources. So I have had a lot of experience over 30 years watching from the late, probably the mid 70s all the way up until about 2006 when I retired. I saw this change. I saw a change, for example, in healthcare, where employers, believe it or not, early on, back in the 60s or 70s, were actually paying 100% of employees' health care as part of a competitive wage package to sustain employees, because if they could sustain it, they could grow their country. So they thought employees were important to them. So therefore, it was worth the money. I'll pay for your health care. And there were a lot of college tuition programs and all this when I first went to work in my lifetime. When I got down to 2006, they were laying people off. They were dumping a bunch of expenses for health care onto the employee. Virtually, college tuition grants and stuff pretty much went away. All the pensions plans began to shrink. And I saw this, and this is a result of the fact that there was a mentality that the employees' value to organizations wasn't as strong. It was all beginning to be housed in the upper echelons of the organizations, and this is part of the I kind of can equate this. I watched this a technological revolution, this information technology revolution evolve, where less and less people were touching and interacting, and more people were making decisions off of database management around those people, not knowing exactly everything that was going on. And I saw this as a consultant, time in and out. I mean, as I went into certain organizations, I could just see this happening. I could see it happening, and you would go in and try to convince executives to go down and spend more time on the shop floor level and sense what was going on and understand it. And uh, but this was beginning to really take hold, and so consequently you end up with, frankly, somebody like Amazon. Look at Amazon. So the question becomes, Jeff Bezos came up with this idea to sell books out of his apartment or garage or whatever he was doing. And then and he said, well, if I can sell books, I can sell other things. And all I have to do is put this together. And yes, that was his idea. But if you think he came up with that idea on his own, you would be sadly mistaken, because there was so much that I'm sure if we check with Jeff Bezos, he pulled from stuff that happened before him and simply was able to put it together in a unique and different way. Okay, so it wasn't just probably Jeff's idea, it was probably a culmination of pulling a lot of stuff that happened before him into a different approach and then coming up with it. But even if you accepted the premise that, okay, he came up with this idea, the fact is he employs millions of people and he will tell you that he did that. Okay. But very few of those millions of them, in fact, the absolutely vast majority are not multimillionaires. Okay. They're not multi-billionaires, the richest man in the world. However, if you if you could imagine this, it probably isn't going to happen this way, but if you could imagine this, if you just took a second and said, everybody walked out of every job for a week or 2 weeks from Amazon, and he couldn't put anybody else in those jobs, okay, Jeff Bezos would fold. He would fold, and Amazon would disappear. And I would hate that because I love Amazon. I buy a lot of stuff through them. So see, it's not easy. It's not like you can just go one way or the other. All those employees just can't leave. They don't have that ability. But it's the balance of power between the top and the employees. And that lack of balance of power creates trust issues and a whole bunch of other things. But one of those dynamics associated with that are things like healthcare, that you try to put a capitalistic perspective on something that really isn't capitalist in nature. If you need a car, if you want to buy a car, you can go out there and buy a car and you can go through all the competition and you look around, you price, you negotiate, you do all that. That's capitalism. Okay. And, uh, and you buy a car. Now, do you need a car? I don't think you do. I mean, maybe you think you do, but you would find a way to get to work without it, and particularly with Uber today, which is a whole another company along this same venue I'm talking about now. But what happens is, um, that concept of capitalism, the idea that healthcare is like that, uh, that it's a commodity, is wrong, because when you force a senior citizen to choose between cost and death, he has no option. There is no option there. You can't do without your medication if you are on a medication that would cause you to die shortly after if you did stop it. See, but you can do it without that car. So there are some things that are bent, made for capitalism. There are other things that aren't. And we have to kind of start figuring out what all that is about. Healthcare is one of those things. That's why I think you need to start taking a look at it, understand it more depth. So let's delve into our first little topic area here along this line. The spending on the U.S. healthcare has grown steadily, and it's been rising from like $2,900 per person in 1980 to people are spending about 11,200, and this is on a private plan now, $11,200 per person in 2018. Okay, this is a 290% increase in spending on healthcare. The average, you take the average over everybody. Uh, Not everybody's doing 290%. Not everybody's there are some people maybe doing more. So that's an extremely expensive proposition. So let me just take a second and I'll pop up just to give you a picture of how that's going to look. This graph on the left is represents that growth. Okay, so in 1980 we were down here, $2,900. Up here, $11,000. What in the world has made this curve accelerate this rapidly to this large amount of money? Now, the question is, are you spending that amount of money? You know, has your income growth grown that much? 290% over 30 years. Okay. So that's a question you would have to ask on a basis, and you have to take things other than just, well, healthcare is just a major one of these that's costing you more. There's a lot more besides that. So we have to take a look at that from that standpoint. So that's one of the things you need to keep in mind. That should convince you to spend some time learning some more about what's going on in this area. So another point here on this first fact is since 1980, it amounts to an annualized growth in real per capita spending of 3.6%. From 2005 to 2018, growth has been a little bit slower. In some cases, like in 1990, it was a little flat even, but generally speaking, it's been about 3.6% since 1980 each year. So if you've been getting 3.5% increase in your salary as an example, you know, if you kept up with the consistent plan and didn't keep reducing your plan to save costs, like, you know, going for a higher deductible, if you kept that plan, all your wage growth at 3.5% would have been eaten up. Now, if you get more than that, you got great. Instead of if you got 6%, maybe you got, 1.2% salary increase. The rest went for healthcare to keep your plan. So that's one way to look at this. Now, I don't know. You have to take a look at your own financials and decide, hey, have I, how has this impacted me over the course of my years? Now, in my case, it was easier for me to see because I was writing these plans for these companies. And so I saw these increase. I saw employees in mine increase also. I don't ever remember a year my insurance didn't increase. Okay. But now you can see in pretty graphic format how it's been impacting you from that standpoint. Now, a small reason for this growth is the aging of the U.S. population. And let me go back to that graph. You can see how this plays out here. what I was talking about earlier. As you can see here, um, this is the average age for spending, uh, and this is the spending per capita. In other words, people between 65 and 85 account for far the greatest cost spending, the greatest amount spent on healthcare in this country. Down here, 0 to 18, hardly anything, and even 19 to 44, hardly anything. Now, we would say this is sort of unfair because if we're charging everybody healthcare, and this is why everybody was screaming about, having to pay a certain amount or being forced into paying a certain amount of insurance if you were in these younger brackets to help pay for this high cost over here that the ACA was promoting. And when that got taken out, of course, there's repercussions from that. People up here lost some insurance. People down here didn't have to pay insurance. So if you're in this bracket, you're going, oh, okay, that's pretty good. And you're in this bracket, you're saying that's not good at all. So both of those, so that's what I meant by when you compromise, excuse me, you have a lose-lose situation. So there is a solution to this, okay, and it can be better than these people not paying anything at all, and these people paying not, or these people paying a lot, and these people paying virtually nothing. Or if you reverse that, that would be just as bad. Somewhere there's a solution in here to that fits all people, okay, and takes care of all people equitably and fairly. And so that is one of the dilemmas we have to deal with. Outside of curbing this cost, we have to figure out how to deal with this discrepancy as part of that problem also. So that's something that I think is important for everybody to understand, that is a deep divided scenario. It's going to be difficult to solve, but it has to be solved in order for everybody to have quality health care in the country and not one or the other doing with or without. Uh, so what you will see about this is aging related increases is only a small portion, though, of the overall spending. When you get into how much, in other words, those older people are spending a lot for healthcare, but it's not because they're old, it's because of how our healthcare system is run and how uh, people are taking advantage of that whole issue. And I saw this in mine. I got charged, for example, in an emergency room in my hospital. I charged by a doctor who was not who was working in an in-network. That means that they're part of my insurance plan hospital, but the doctor on call that night wasn't. And so I got a separate, what they call surprise bill for $1,500 for that 8 minutes or so that they looked at me, sent me down to X-ray, and then sent me over to Ann Arbor, Michigan, from Brighton, Ann Arbor, Michigan, to get surgery because they didn't have a surgeon available. So I saw that doctor. I am guessing less than 8 minutes, literally 8 minutes. $1,500 bill hit me. After going into my insurance company, they said, well, we'll look into it. Now, I know what they did. They called Medicare and told Medicare to get with the doctor. The Medicare said, we're not going to pay you. I don't care how much you sue. You're just not going to get it. And he doesn't have it to give it to you, so you're just not going to get it. So that's how they got negotiated down from $1,500 to $400, which Medicare paid 100% of. See, I had to pull tooth and nails to get that information, but I found it. So that's what got me digging into a lot of other stuff. And there's so much of this So much of this that you're going to find out is just phenomenal, and how this is being run that needs to be cleaned up and worked on. So just to keep in mind, it's not the older folks that's the biggest part of this problem. It's the charges they're putting on, or provide, or the charges they're making these older people pay. Um, and you're not seeing that if you're younger, because you're basically not going to the doctor like probably 10 years out of your first 20 years of your life there until you're 35 or 40, unless you're pregnant or something like that. Okay, so that's something for you to consider and keep an eye on these upcoming questions. And I'm going to show you. I'll also put a link to this book that I got about the healthcare system and how it's being run and managed. These two guys wrote. Okay, the aging that took place from 1980 to 2014 would have led to a 30% rise in per capita spending, far below the 250% total increase over the same period. That study showed that's why it's not just being older that's causing the problem. Being older would account for maybe 34% of that increase in spending, but not the 250% that we're seeing here and there. So underlying health conditions, things like obesity have gotten worse over time, necessitating increase in healthcare expenditures, and that's what we're seeing. We're an overweight, indulgent society. There's just no question about it. I'm one of those guys. Sorry, uh, and I'm paid for it. I mean, the good news is I chose 10 years in my latter part of my life to jump into personal training, and so I kept myself in better shape maybe than I would have in my 50s and late 50s and 60s had I not done that. And so consequently, there were times where I got so sick of businesses and what I was seeing along this line, but not just this, but others too, like layoffs and everything. I just gave it all up. And that cost me a lot. I mean, I just gave up a whole lot of my income, and I had to do things, different things. But from 58 to 65, I had no health insurance. So I couldn't go to the doctor. I didn't go to the doctor. You know, now the good news is during that time, I was staying healthy by exercising, eating right. And by learning that, I was teaching other people how to do it. I was trying to practice it myself, and I benefited from that for that 5 years and all the way up until my early 70s here, where finally my age is catching up with me, and I'm a little bit on the edge of hypertension. So you have to start taking medications and that kind of stuff. So it's not just getting older. It's this whole idea of the society in general is beginning to cost more, and and other things also. There is a thing called uh, I think that's, I don't even know how to pronounce it. Bono's cost disease describes how sectors with relatively low productivity growth, like healthcare, tend to experience rising costs. Low productivity growth, like healthcare. So what that's really saying is healthcare, if you're looking at it as a business, is not a very productive business. It's not generating what Amazon generates as a business. Why? That's because some people come in that can't afford to pay, and you still have to run them through the same diagnostics you do somebody who can pay. And you just can't say, no, we're not going to do that. And so uh, they expend a lot of money, and they don't get a lot of return or productivity out of that. And so, they begin, that's why your aspirin costs, you know, 35 cents if you buy it at Walmart. It costs you $35 if you have it given to you in the hospital. So those are the things that you come into is same principle. For example, if you pop up some Orville Redenbacher popcorn, put in a paper bag, and carry it in the theater, they won't let you take it in because that cost you about I don't know, $1.30 or less per bag of popcorn, and they're going to charge you $3.80 per that same size popcorn. See, and you can't bring that in. Well, why? Why can't I bring my food in? I mean, I'm going to get food, and the deal is, well, I want you to pay the $3 more. So that's the same principle going on here. It's the same principle I ran into with car insurance. If I had car insurance in Oklahoma, I came to Michigan, it was 3 times higher. Went from like $89 to $100 a month to $300 a month. Okay. And even in Oklahoma, living in Yukon, Oklahoma versus Oklahoma City made a difference of a $50 to $85 difference a month. Why? What caused that? I mean, it was still me, you know. So, but they throw in different things that they don't tell you about. They make it very difficult for you to understand and find out about it. And so consequently, you have large amounts of expenditures. Think about your car insurance and your healthcare insurance. Just the insurance factors. Forget, if you had an accident or you have to go doctor or whatever. Just the insurance factors. What percentage of your average income, net income, do you fork out to those organizations? That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. So that's what I'm trying to help you understand by going through some of these facts. So this is one of the things you need to understand. It's not just people being sick. It's also how healthcare is run. It's not run as a company that is focused on productivity. Okay, it's just not. And yet you'll find some significant salaries in all of those arenas. Okay, the salaries that if somebody was that unproductive in some of the oil companies I consulted with and other businesses I consulted with, I did oil, finance, and law, and a bunch of others. They're getting fired, or they're trying to fire them. So understanding why healthcare has had little productivity growth relative to the rest of the economy is really kind of important, folks. It's really kind of important for you to understand. And lastly, as part of this fact one is, as we explore the other facts we're going to be talking about here, problems with healthcare markets have contributed to rapidly rising costs in recent decades. And by that I mean what you're paying for healthcare in New York City is different than what you're paying for in Weatherford, Oklahoma. Same surgery, same drugs, same treatment, different costs, sometimes significantly different costs, thousands of dollars. Okay, it's the same way. There's this good RX that I got into and looked at and actually tried it and it works, but in the end, the place I go basically has the same price as good RX. But I looked at one drug that they were recommending I take. It was just really basically one shot, and one pharmaceutical group, one drug store, so to speak, was charging $200 some odd for that. Another one was charging $110 for that. And with good RX, I could bring that down another $25. That's what's going on. It's not just, the sick people that are the issue. And it is from the standpoint that, yes, you should eat right. Yes, you should exercise. Yes, you should take care of yourself. And if you have a genetic scenario, you ought to find the medications to help you sustain that so that it doesn't accelerate your into something greater. Yes, all of that is a factor, but even more important is how this businesses are run. You know, how these businesses are run. And trust me, when we get into some of these facts, and these are facts you can go look up. Now, interestingly enough, I tried asking doctors, um, I tried asking pharmaceutical company managers, I tried asking insurance people, and these people avoid this with the plague. They avoid it. They just don't want to give you information on it. They don't really have a good reason for you to understand what the hell's going on, because you're liable to get upset about it when you find out. And if that's the case, that's when you become not just active in getting people put into position, you know, getting, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, you get them placed in the office, they still need to do something. And what you need to do is make sure they're not being manipulated or moved by things that keep the system status quo on something like healthcare, because it is not working for you. You know, you trust me, you will get older. You will be impacted by this down the road. The question is, are you going to be impacted a hell of a lot more than I was impacted? And what's going to happen if it changes and you just don't have those protections and you don't have a job and all of a sudden a pandemic hit and took all your life savings? See, you don't know. You don't know what's going to hit, folks. So systems, part of what government is there for is to provide for the general. In fact, it's in the preamble. If you read the preamble, it's a great job description for the government. And one of those performance criteria, if you're into performance management, is provide for the general welfare of the country, the people in the country, the general welfare, not for the rich, not for the poor, the general welfare for everybody. Healthcare is one of those issues. And there's one of those issues you are not, I promise you, you are not going to have control over. You're not going to be able to say, I'm not going to die because I'm not going to, I just refuse to die because I'm not going to spend the money. And I'm not going to spend the money, but, or let me put it this way, I'm not going to die and I'm not going to spend the money to keep from dying. It isn't going to work. It isn't going to work like that. And the sooner people wake up and start understanding that, begin to look through all of this, you begin to see how other countries have discovered these problems and are dealing with them. So we're a little behind in that area. A little behind in that area. So we're going to be covering Wednesday night at 7 p.m. the other topic area. We won't go quite as long next time, simply because we won't be covering a lot of the upfront stuff that I covered, just to get it into the record here, so that the videos in the video series will have some of that information about why you want to get concerned about this. So if you have questions or whatever, you're certainly welcome to put them in the comment sections, and I'll try to do whatever I can do to see what you might have from that standpoint. But that's all I have for this evening. Hopefully that's giving you enough, tantalizing you enough to want to come in Wednesday night and take a look. These will be posted and available in a series on my Facebook page. So if you want to find, since they're sequential, you might want to visit and go through the video you missed before you go to the next one. Questions are in order 1 through 12, so you might want to do that before you jump in. If you want to join me live here and just like be part of a dialogue while we're kind of covering the questions, and you have some significant background in these areas that might help us understand it as a total population, you're welcome to message me on my Facebook page here. I had that up there a little bit earlier. Um, Let me see if I can get it here. There we go. There's a Facebook page. It's facebook.com What the Flip Podcast. It's really pretty simple. It's all one word. And you go in there, you can message me there. And you might want to put some notifications on if you're interested in looking at some of these other topic areas that are coming up. I'm going to post, I think I have the one posted for next Wednesday, and then sometime this weekend I'll post the next Fact 3 and Fact 4 questions over the weekend for you to look at. So that's why you might want to like the page and then put some notifications on it. You don't have to. I'm not a big person about likes, to be honest with you. But in this case, notification might let you know what's coming up next, and you'll see it in the events, and you can also see it in the events section. So the next 2 of these will be in the events. After I complete them, I'm going to put them in the video section under a series under the same title, America's Under Attack, the Healthcare War. That'll be the title of the series, and hopefully leave them up there. Well, they'll be in there for people to go watch and see and go back and refresh your memory if you're about to have a meeting on healthcare with your bosses or something. And having this kind of information is a little helpful, because I remember as a consultant, they used to say, hey, look, this is really good for you. This program here is really good for you. Well, it may appear to look good for you now, but it's going to look, if you went back and look what was happening in the latter part of the 1960s or the 1970s, it looks horrible. It looks horrible. You're paying for everything. The company used to pay for everything. It's a whole philosophy change over the last 30 years. It really got me as a consultant and in a business. I saw a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff that really didn't make a lot of sense in the long run. And now when I look back over it, after I look back on 30 years, in fact, and working in business and consulting, and I can see those trends that evolved so clearly, and kind of the underpinning of what drove them. And it's deeper than just healthcare or housing or stuff like that. It's a philosophy change that people were moving towards, that where money was driving a whole lot of the issue in this country as opposed to, say, Canada or Europe or someplace else. And now we see the consequences. We're beginning to see some of the consequences of that. So, thanks for joining. If you joined, if not, I hope you see this video and join me Wednesday. Okay. I have a segment here where if I do see comments, I can pop the comments up on the screen, and I like to do that when that happens. So until then, take some time and get interested in managing your country and managing what we need to have as a country to be really good as a country that benefits us all, not just a few of us, just a particular group. Have a great evening. I'm Vic Vogel. This is What the Flip Podcast. Till Wednesday. See you then.